Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic just released, and there's so many hidden Easter eggs in every corner of Murray's costume manor, as well as so much new lore that the game throws onto the table that actually helps us solve the entirety of the story behind the newest games, and fill in the blanks of the old lore too. So let me take you through the entire game from start to finish, and reveal every single thing you might have missed, as well as explaining those things that you did see. So without further ado, please subscribe and turn on notifications, and let's begin breaking down this game. The game starts off introducing us to our main protagonist, Arnold, a Fazbear Entertainment technician working way too many hours for his own good. Dispatch informs us that a contractor of theirs, Edwin Murray, was developing some tech for them that has gone silent. So, due to a breach in his contract, everything he was making for them is theirs to collect. So Arnold heads to Murray's costume manor in hopes of collecting their property. Within his van, we can immediately see some Easter eggs, such as a Spring Bunny bobblehead, reinforcing what we already knew, that Fredbear's family diner is indeed open and operational at this point in time, and this bobblehead is also reminiscent of the bobbleheads on the desk in FNAF 3. The dice up front show a 5 and a 6, and there's not much information I could get out of this, trust me, I tried. Arnold also has a lot of junk in his car, a pizza box we'll see in full later, some chips, multiple cans of exotic beverage, originating from Help Wanted, and Roxy's Rootin' Tootin' Root Beer, the name a clear nod to Roxy, who we'll learn more about later. On his passenger seat there's also his employee credentials form, from Fazbear Entertainment, that expires in 1979. Arnold also has no emergency contact. Further into the van, we can see his notes for the job being retrieve Fazbear and assets from the premises, with a location, the order number 02175, the phone number 1-800-555-5555, which if you don't already know, no real phone number contains 555, as it's always commonly used in and actually reserved for fictional stories, due to old films and shows accidentally using real phone numbers, leading to prank calls, etc. And there's also a date on it that looks to be 1979, although it's broken off of course. There's then a bunch of cards in a random order with the back of the cards having moon and sun imagery, which we'll see a lot more further in this game, but was also featured on Mystic Hippo's cards in Help Wanted 2, interestingly enough. We can also read another work order form stating he needs to specifically extract blueprints from MCM facility to earn him $30 for the job, with them paying an extra $8.45 for gas. So in today's currency, this job is being done for $170.25. We can also read here his employee appears to be Chris. I can't really tell though, and he was employed on the 7th of September 1977. We can also see another job he did for a company named Nursk, where he completed delivering 2x crane arms, 16 quick disconnect coupler, 8 valve checks, 10 thermoplastic pressure hose and couplings, but either way we then collect the data diver, which looks and acts quite similar to the Faz wrench. It could be assumed that this is another piece of old technology they decide to then bring back later in the timeline, just with a new look and or mechanic. We exit the van and can now look at the front of the van, which has the license plate that I think reads 38A6784, which obviously is very different to the one shown in Help Wanted 2, that drives off from MCM with the Mexis machine, containing a 1 and ending in 27. Speaking of, when we see Murray's costume manor, it obviously looks very different to the one in Help Wanted 2, which we do actually see later in this game. It's assumed this is what Edwin wanted it to look like, but just never got around to renovating it all. From the left to the right side, we can see a giant house on the top of the hill, which is very reminiscent of the Afton house, which we'll talk more about later. Near the gates to that house is also a mailbox which we use throughout the game to collect mail and hidden lore, and we'll discuss all of them throughout this video. On the other side of the fence we can see another Fazbear Entertainment van. Another team was sent here before us, and judging by the van, which looks quite beaten up, failed. As we go around the side of the building, we walk past a lot of random characters and equipment, such as this mural of Hedgehog Hudgy, duck, seal and pig spring riders, elephant slides, outdoor equipment, etc. If you look right, you'll also see we're not too far from a big city. As we continue, we can see a small playground on the other side of the fence, as well as a bright orange ball next to it. We later learn in this game that this playground was built for David and is where Edwin left him before, well. But we then enter through the client and deliveries entrance, where Edwin welcomes us in with a client tour, telling us each of their creations are available for purchase or lease, and that they specialize in creating costume entertainment and carnival game technologies. This is already pretty different to the books where Edwin's company is bought out by Fazbear Entertainment, and he instead works purely for them. So it seems that they take place in a different timeline. Although it should be noted, the broad strokes of the stories do seem to remain either way. On the wall of the entry room there's an elephant and a Be Yourself poster, poster that was originally shown off at PAX, as well as the pizza box that was inside Arnold's van that actually comes from Fredbear's family diner, containing the same design as the posters shown off in Security Breach, including the very same number. We then enter an amazing demotronic performance by a handful of Edwin's original characters, assumedly so since they have not been purchased and are just on display later alongside other Edwin original characters. And from left to right, that includes a cutout of a gift box that seems extremely similar to number 1 crate, which we already assume that Edwin made the trash in the game, especially from 5 Laps at Freddy's literally calling Edwin's first vacuums Hug, a birthday puppy, Mr. Octopus, a swinging bee, Miss Helpful, Mr. Helpful, a cowboy pig patch, a diving seal, a swan, a juggling duck, Jug Band Monty, Happy Frog, and Jug Band Hippo. Jug Band Hippo, the Happy Frog, and Cowboy Pig Patch end up joining together with some others to become the Mediocre Melodies at some point, assumedly after one of the endings, which we'll get into which ending may be canon later, which probably leads Fazbear Entertainment to take a lot of the characters and their concepts to reuse at different establishments. I don't know the legality of it all, but due to the later timeline, it does seem that with Edwin gone and with how we leave MCM later on, all the properties and assets seem to just go to Fazbear Entertainment, but we'll talk more about this later. Jug Band Monty, on the other hand, is obviously a reference to Security Breach's Ruin DLC, where we learn in the character's storyline, Monty was originally in a one-man jug band, before wanting to become a part of the glam rock band, which is removing Jug Band Hippo from the story since he's part of the Mediocre Melodies by that point. Although something a lot of people missed is that above the sun mural on the ground is a hanging jester costume with a previous Fazbear employee inside. Also something people missed is that above the diving seal are a comedy and tragedy mask, referencing the sun/moon styled comedy and tragedy masks later in the timeline. The third thing people miss is that within the song itself, they say the iconic line associated with the Freddy's restaurants, where fantasy meets fun. After the show fails, we go up to wind back Mr. Octopus. We then use our data diver to progress with a square symbol, which we quickly learn is our clearance through the building, progressing from basic to security, repair, creator, admin, and then finally executive. Now we're in a giant hallway with a lot to talk about, which I won't be repeating characters we've already seen before, but we'll go left to right starting with this elephant character who returns in Security Breach's Ruin DLC, down within the Mimic's lair. It's unclear how the costumes we saw underground in Ruin got there, but some theorize it to mean MCM is actually underneath the Pizzaplex as well. We'll talk about that theory more later though. Then we see boxes containing Murray's Marvelous Cleanovac, whose commercial was one of the teasers leading up to the game's release. Similar next to it is Just Oat cereal, which states it tastes funny, and is actually a product of MCM. They do way more than just costumes here. We also see Murray's Magic Coat Rack, another product that was used as a teaser for the game. Directly across from each other we then see 2 distinctly different coloured Hedgehog Haji mascots, which is actually the case for almost all the mascots in this game, where it's the exact same costume but just different colours. Continuing on, we also see Orville Elephant, another character who goes on to join the Mediocre Melodies after the fall of MCM. Down from there is also a gift box, the collectibles of this game, the first featuring a Dead-Eye Roxy rodeo hat, another character from Security Breach who seemed to have originated decades ago, only to be eventually reused by Fazbear Entertainment. We'll talk more about her specifically later. Coming from that area are a bunch of mice distractions, which we used throughout the game. A Gearat reference? Maybe? No? But anyways, down the hall there's also a clickable distraction, another set of distractions used in the game, featuring a Hedgehog Haji cutout, that plays the same song used in the Mycelium Men's commercial shown before the game's release. After starting up a generator, the door to the security office opens for us to enter, and I want to quickly say before we continue the breakdown, you really don't have to go crazy to start the generator. The calmer, the better. But within the security office we can see our data diver access station, which we use to upgrade our permissions through the game. Some people don't understand this puzzle too well and kind of just do it, but it's very simple. From your travel right, set the boxes on each row to 1, while making sure to leave at least 1 box set to 0 on each row for your travel back. Easy. We also see drawings on the wall of the elephant, Jackie with a caterpillar, a Mycelium Man, 2 people and a star, as well as Sleepy Moon, which we do see later in the game. We also see that it's 12, midnight, as this game follows Security Breach's 6 hours of one night gameplay as a reference to the first game's midnight to 6 AM gameplay. We can also use the data diver on the helper, acronym for Human Education and Language Protocol Element Router, computers throughout the game to either look at the maps of the building, logs we find throughout the game, to play the Moon.exe game, which we'll talk more about later, and to later use the Parachute.exe program. We then talk to Dispatch, who informs us on the Mimic Endoskeleton, our main antagonist of the game, an endoskeleton who can fit into any costume no matter the size, since it can shapeshift and will take on the persona of the character it occupies. Sounds great, except for the homicidal glitches within its programming, which don't worry gets explained later in the game, causing it to be aggressive to anyone who enters MCM, its home. I will say this speech about the Mimic's homicidal glitches in its programming, as well as ability to take on the persona of the characters, is one of the many references to Glitch Trap or the Anomaly throughout this game, which a big theory about him is that it's actually the homicidal mimic programming which ends up using the information gathered from Help Wanted itself, mainly the pizza party level about Spring Bonnie luring kids, to then take the form of Glitch Trap, a mascot version specifically, and begin mimicking the persona of the character. Although like I said, there's more references throughout the game, so let's just continue. Dispatch also tells us to go searching for the power, which something people seem to have missed is throughout the gameplay the camera monitors give you hints on where you're supposed to go, and what the area should look like, just in case you're not sure. Within the power room we can see a withered birthday puppy mascot, who has a dead body stuffed inside of it with insects all around. Similar to the jester earlier, this one we can clearly see says Team 12, meaning at minimum 12 whole teams have come and died at MCM. Then after completing the molten puzzle, which just a tip, always start by making sure the input and output are connected to a bar. Only then should you start to fill out the middle. But if you then turn around to the windows, you can actually see the Mimic inside an elephant costume watching you. Once we return, Dispatch continues to talk about the Mimic, his unfortunate glitches again, and that our main goal is to get Edwin's original schematics for it before they can then find out how to deactivate the endoskeleton. We then have to use the inventory tube system to first put away the Roxy hat, as this machine is where we put all the collectibles in this game for it to count as collected, and also to withdraw a crank tool, which we then use to open another gate. As you continue, the Mimic wearing its elephant costume will pop out of a box and begin hunting you. Interestingly, if you hide in a locker and simply just listen to the Mimic, it's saying something really slow and deep in a similar fashion to Glitch Trap's voice lines in Help Wanted, where anytime it's around you, it mimics Tape Girl's hi hello voice lines slowly and deeply. Again, another reference to the Mimic programming being behind Glitch Trap. I've tried to figure out exactly what he's saying slowly, and even asked Rytos if he can figure it out, and neither of us can. The most I can make out is him literally just going dum dee dum dee dum. Something people seem to have missed about the Mimic's AI in this game is that it actually changes depending on the suit. Some suits are slower, some are fast, some will see you enter lockers and kill you, and some won't even if you do it close to them. It's great. As we continue into and down the main hallway, we can see a covered up lion mascot with a jacket which is the same one we saw in the Ruined DLC that the Mimic himself wore in the Scooper ending. Later in the game you can actually get a code to access this hidden room, 26294, which inside contains a poster for Lelly's Lollies from Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, FNAF 6, and is branded under Fazbear Foods, already under their license. Continuing down the hall normally, we see a picture of David and the Mimic holding hands together, hinting at their close bond we learn about later in the game. There's also a note for all employees to cancel the Bring Your Child to Work day, due to it being a safety risk, as well as another accident occurring. This memo is dated the 23rd of April 1974, which is assumedly before David's death, so it's unclear what accident occurred earlier. We can also see an order form of a harlequin print with an iconic smile, requested by Internal on the 10th of October 1976, and to be picked up on January 1st, 1977. We then go up the elevator to reach the showrooms. On the left, we can immediately see a blueprint for Jugman Mr. Hippo, which is one of the many blueprints we can find throughout the game. Before heading into the obvious gameplay continues here area, we can continue traveling to another office, which on the way we see a soda fountain containing another FNAF 6 brand, this time Pop Soda, as well as Roxy's Root and Toot and Root Beer that we saw already, Exotic Beverage which originated in Help Wanted, Colaroni which is a reference to Help Wanted's Sodaroni, which was only established in 1986, so this is the precursor product, as well as Ice Cold Milk, which we also saw at the start but couldn't make out at the time. These are all probably a part of the Fazbear Food brand already. After upgrading our clearance in the office and putting away any collectibles we found, we then head into Jackie's room. Within, we unwind Jackie's box to get the crank and also see Jackie itself. Take note that Jackie has normal green eyes here for later. After using the crank to slightly open a security door, we walk down a hallway featuring a poster of Jackie herself with the Let's Play slogan, a Fredbear's Family Diner poster that we saw in Security Breach, another Be Yourself poster, a Sharpay Salon poster with the slogan You Look Doggone Beautiful, another elephant poster, and finally a Mr. Octopus poster. We then enter an office with a Digityper robot, who looks like a rudimentary version of Security Breach's staff bots, which were also about digitizing regular mundane tasks. As we then head to the generator in the office, we have a board of random papers and memos. A lot of them are just reused assets, but one is a new order form, this time for Sharpay Salon, dated 15th of December 1975, to be picked up on the 15th of March 1976. So it appears MCM will finish a costume and have it ready for pickup within 4 4 months. Once we finish the generator, Jackie now comes inside and pulls its body out of the box, destroying the Digityper before throwing him into the wall for us to then escape down. We then go through a chase scene in the tunnels that doesn't have much to note down. Since it's a chase, you're not meant to really look around, although I will say this boarded up door here is a direct reference to FNAF 1's security doors. Also note that now Jackie has orange eyes instead of her original green eyes, directly telling us that the mimic is now inside of it. Also note that its mask now has black tears coming from its eyes, similar to the puppet. After falling through the vents back into the security office, we've now hit 1 AM and talked to Dispatch again. He tells us more about the mimic, how it was created to apparently entertain David while Edwin was busy at work, mimicking the actions of those around it, and so when it was exposed to violence, which gets answered later, it then mimicked the violence, which to me sounds like agonies in the mimic systems, just like we theorized happens in the books too. After telling us how the previous technicians died from blood loss after the mimic detached their limbs, we're then instructed to head back to the welcome show area to reset it, so the door can successfully open this time, so we can then head into the welcome lobby. Within the welcome lobby, we can immediately see a Cleanovac on display as Edwin's most shining achievement. This would be because, similar to the books, it appears the Cleanovac sold extremely well, and was the first major product for MCM. Since 5 Laps at Freddys showed us Hug, it's likely that Hug was the first product that did better than usual, so then Edwin created the Cleanovac as an improvement, which did even better. We can also see this cutout for Carter Caterpillar, answering what that caterpillar next to Jackie was in the earlier drawing. We also see a portrait of Edwin Murray himself, as well as his wife Fiona, who we learn due to the audio logs in the game Edwin first meets on the job and gets asked to do the voice for what goes on to be named Mrs. Helpful, a representation of Fiona, with Mr. Helpful then of course being a representation of Edwin. Interestingly enough, connecting this to how the mimic represents itself as a childlike Helpy in the modern games makes the twist in this game easier to see coming. There's also a portrait of Edwin Murray Sr., who was actually the one who created and owned MCM at first, although when he unfortunately passed away, the entire business then fell onto Edwin's shoulders to handle. Either way, also on the second floor is where I got the names Jugband Monty and Jugband Hippo from, as you can see them clearly named here, which is also why I claim they're likely Edwin originals, since they're in a room of Edwin's original characters, such as the Cleanomac and the Mycelium Men. Also, just a fun gameplay fact, you can skip the main chase portion by going straight to the keypad upstairs first, and inputting 0158 as the code stays the same every playthrough. The mimic won't spawn. As you continue, you'll meet a Cleanovac, who upon looking at you is actually able to be padded. Either way, after you insert the tape and complete the repair tasks, you head into the elevator you just powered, heading to floor 2 where you head to the Showtime lobby, which is where you can see the Fredbear's Singing Show poster hung up, which we'll talk more about later. Continuing to the main show lobby, we can turn right to enter into a secret office with our first audio log, which like I mentioned earlier gives us a lot of interesting lore to chew on. The audio log here is where I got the information for Edwin and Fiona meeting on the job. Within this room there's also a poster for Sleepy Moon, which Moon.exe is based on, and also appears elsewhere throughout the game as a secret bus level that is actually completely optional, so almost everyone misses it. He's extremely creepy and continuously hums a lullaby. It's one of the creepiest sections in the game that again almost everyone misses. Either way, after heading into the Big Top showroom and completing the puzzle, we then meet Big Top himself and enter the showroom. Big Top clearly resembles DJ Music Man in the later timeline, but is clearly not called Music Man or anything similar. But like the other characters who end up coming back in FNAF 6, this could have been what inspired the later Music Man, which then inspired the later DJ Music Man with the size of Big Top. Either way, inside his showroom there's a ton of mannequins that all state that MCM created these back in 1972. Also, funnily enough, they all have FNAF 1979 on the bottom, which this game is obviously a FNAF game that takes place in 1979. You can then play all 3 of the minigames in the room, which interestingly in one of the shooting galleries, Mr. Helpful says they have available themes for Castle, Rodeo, Space, Great Barrier Reef, Circus, and Haunted House, which ends up being true later in the timeline as well, with a rodeo theme for the Foxy Log Ride level in Help Wanted 2, Space in the Fazzablast level, Great Barrier Reef in the Pirate Ride level in the first Help Wanted, Circus technically on any of them, and Haunted House through the FNAF 3 themed Fazzablast. Upon completing a minigame, Big Top, with the mimic downside judging by his later orange eyes, begins to look for you and will kill you upon finding you. You need to simply head locker to locker all the way back to the puzzle to reset and trap him back in his original position. Once you've done this 3 times, you then have enough free spins at the prize wheel to win the grand prize, and progress. After heading up the stairs, there's actually a poster for Mystic Hippo from Help Wanted 2, with the slogan "Find Your Own Destiny," which remember in Help Wanted 2 itself, her machine has the MCM branding on it. This seemingly further hints that Jugband Hippo was indeed a Murray original, as well as Mystic Hippo, that Fazbear Entertainment eventually acquired. Either way, you then have to match the icons of the hats to what the mannequins below are wearing to get the correct code to input into the keypad. to then unlock a door which takes you to an upgrade station for the creator permissions, which above that station is another log of Fiona telling Edwin she's heading out to help the Full Fest crew with a terrible feeling about something going wrong there, getting Trisha to babysit David. Fiona unfortunately never returns from this trip though, and with both Help Wanted 2 continuously showing us Full Fest burns down, as well as Moon.exe telling us the woman's side of their married statue just happens to be burned, it appears that a fire occurred at the Full Fest that led to Fiona's death. We later hear an audio log where Edwin wonders why she even went there and is unsure how he's going to tell David, saying their lives are now ruined. Speaking of Trisha the babysitter though, theorist AnyMap9917 posted to the FNAF Theories Reddit something that I thought might be worth sharing. They suggest that Trisha is actually the name behind the infamous Mrs. Afton. This is mainly because in Security Breach at what's clearly representing the Afton family table, Miss Afton is sitting at the head of it. Why? Well, this character is actually called a nanny bot. As you probably know, a nanny is an actual job to be a professional caregiver for children, and so we have a nanny bot representing Mrs. Afton, an established close friendship between William Henry and Edwin and Fiona, and a random babysitter who they decide to give a name, instead of just saying the babysitter who will get David or something, which means it is possible that Mrs. Afton's name could be Trisha, and the reason she's at the head of the table is because she was an important figure in David's life, that the Mimic then recreates here. While there's not too much strong evidence supporting the theory, I do actually think it works pretty well, and there's not too much against it. Further down the room of the audio log is also a poster for Candy Cadet, another FNAF 6 character that appears to have been an Edwin creation. Whether it's an Edwin original or something he was commissioned to make is still a question though, as right next to it is a Lally's Lollies poster, already branded by Fazbear Foods. We then head out onto the roof where it's snowing, hinting the game may take place in the winter, and so December, January, or February. Also, if you keep exploring the roof, you can see what appears to be a giant lake in the distance, which if you believe the theory that MCM is underneath the Pizzaplex, then this could possibly be where the water is coming from that creates the lake that we see in Ruin. Either way, after continuing up the roof, you hit a button which alerts Big Top to your location, beginning a chase which eventually leads both you and Big Top falling down a collapsing section of the building, leading Big Top to look quite ruined, and you back to the main area. Entering back into the security office, and it's now 2 AM. We're instructed to head into the theater through the workshops, leading us into a Springlock assembly station. That's right, Springlocks. As we learn later in the game, while Fazbear Entertainment still created the Springlock designs themselves, Edwin was actually commissioned to help mass produce them, mainly for Fredbear's Family Diner. He helps make the newer versions as confirmed through an email log with Fiona, although they still don't know what to do about the water damage, aka what we later know causes the failure with William, although eventually Henry tells them not to use them for their upcoming project, likely because of how dangerous they are and how many incidents were occurring with them. This helps bridge the gaps of the lore together, which we'll talk more about later, although there's an audio log in this room where Edwin introduces David to M1, the Mimic, who he confirms is an endoskeleton that can wear any costume that they've created, and who Edwin says is basically a new babysitter that will stay with them and help around the house. This tells us that the Mimic was created after Fiona's death, and similar to the books is used as a babysitter / friend to David. The purpose of the Mimic will get explained further later on, so let's just continue. Here you must enter the workshop and find all 5 pieces of the Springlock suit to create the Captain Springlock suit. Down here we can also see the tiger head for the costume that is eventually used by the Mimic in Ruin. After we craft the Springlock and energize the suit, we can then actually get into it and wear it. Interestingly, the animation is similar to getting into Glamrock Freddy, which considering no employees ever get into the Glamrocks, meaning they aren't new improved Springlocks, I'm pretty sure it's simply just because both games are made by Stillwell Studios, so of course their animations are similar. Either way, we then go deeper into the workshops and are even greeted by the Mimic, who now just waves since it sees us as a Springlock suit. We then have to go and reactivate the power to then use the elevator to travel further to the theater. Edwin begins talking about how they've created a money-saving television studio where they can use the MCM story template to generate new stories and write itself, which is very reminiscent of the storyteller in the books, that generates new stories for the Pizzaplex using the Mimic's program. Either way, we then head through the theater to eventually unhook a bridge to fall into place, so we can take Captain to the stage lift to begin the show. This puppet show is interestingly about Foxy, who isn't currently the captain, helping his crew, including Roxy, host a birthday party for the captain, which we're currently wearing, beating Mr. Octopus on the way. Interestingly, this double confirms that Roxy existed this far back, and was actually a part of the captain's pirate crew with Foxy second in command. So in the story of these characters in universe, it's likely that when Foxy eventually became captain, Roxy becomes second in command, and we can then assume that later in the story, around the time of the Pizzaplex, they make Roxy eventually take his place and become captain of their crew. It's also assumed that if this is where they create Foxy's pirate adventures, the puppet characters are also likely how they made Fredbear and Friends, and when Freddy Fazbear's Pizza eventually opened, they then likely used animation instead for Freddy and Friends on tour. Either way, after after completing the show the place collapses, and we eventually are recovered by Nurse Dolly. She says this isn't the captain's first time in here and that it's another springlock failure. This has happened before. We learn in the email logs that Ralph, possibly the phone guy Ralph, has gone through a springlock failure and is in hospital, likely in the captain due to this voice line. Either way, we leave the suit and head into the nurse's hospital, and after a showcase of Dolly, we head up to a quick section to collect a gear, to open the main door to head inside, turn on the generators to open a vent to crawl through, and get into a section where you need to find 6 pieces of trash to open up the chute. Fun fact, you can just use the mice distractions, and I'm not joking. Then you click the chute button and it opens up the maintenance door for you to head inside. Use the trash to knock Dolly into the molten lava, to then return back, open the door to the power reactor, and then head into a chase with Molten Dolly. Towards the end of the chase, right before the vent, there's a clown mask with a long neck, which could be a coincidence but sounds similar to Eleanor from the Fazbear Frights books. Continuing forward, there's another quick section with Molten Dolly to an elevator that closes in on her, similar to the Ruin DLC where an elevator closes on the Mimic. After this, you fix up an elevator before Molten Dolly eventually jumps on top, trying to come in, causing you to have to fix it up again. Once you do this, if you watch closely, you can actually see the Mimic pull itself out of Dolly and jump ship. This itself should tell you that, if you haven't already figured it out, the Mimic is inside all of the enemies in this game, from the little to the big to even the one burning on fire. After this, you head through storage back to the security office and it's now 3 AM. Then you head into the warehouse and then encounter Party Time Chica, which later in the game we learn was actually a part of the Chica's Party World establishment that we first learned about in the lead up to Sister Location. This location featured Chica, of course, as well as her food minions, including Mr. Cupcake, Mrs. Burger, Mrs. Shake, and Mr. Chicken. We later learned that they're using Fiona's designs for Chica, although it looks a little bit scarier than her art, which we do see later in the game too. So Fazbear Entertainment basically took Freddy and Bunny from Fredbear's Family Diner, due to Fredbear and Spring Bunny, then Chica from Chica's Party World, and then finally Foxy from the Pirate Puppet Show to come up with the band for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Also in this warehouse is boxes for the Stay Up Latte, another product used as a teaser for this game. Either way, after restarting the power, you then hit a button to enter the loading bay. Once here, you can immediately see a board for parade floats, which they finished about half for Fazbear Entertainment, a quarter for City Council, a little over a quarter for Mercedes Nursery, and they fully completed their work for the Construction Union Local 21. Continuing on, we then complete a quick puzzle, and then head down into the basement, and then into the admin wing. At the front, we find Chica's partner in crime, Mr. Cupcake, who has seemingly been repurposed here to be an alarm. Either way, we then head into the admin entrance, where there's a few bookshelves containing books titled Managing the Modern Workforce and History of Business Culture. Continuing on, we then have another section against Chica, where you must head locker to locker, avoiding as many Mr. Cupcake alarms as possible, all the way to the back where inside we can actually see a physical can of exotic beverage, a Swing Bees Bubble snack, Jess cereal, Plano chips, Wonder Crisps, Chica's cheesy chips, a can of Coloroni, and a Fizzle snack. We then continue through the admin wing and upstairs to Edwin's main office. We can quickly head right and find a bunch of designs and decorations for Chica's Party World. We can see a membership card hanging up, some designs on the table, and posters for the real cupcake, a big Miss Shake, the world famous chowder, a chicken burger, and potato fries. As we can see on the table, they were right about Chica not looking as cute as the designs planned. As we continue, we can actually stop at this desk to read a termination notice where someone quote-unquote urinated on the equipment. Ew. Either way, we then continue through a vent to finally get our executive access to the building, which is also where we collect a piece of mail that is quite important. So let's take a read. We are almost there. I need the rest of the Murray staff contact info. The sooner the better. You get that for me and I can sweeten the deal. How would you like to manage one of the new franchise locations? W.A. William Afton. That's right, William Afton is actively looking for Edwin's staff information to contact them with better jobs, better pay, and better opportunity for his own company, stealing them all for MCM to inevitably collapse. Like a lot of these, there's more information that we'll get into later. Continuing on for now though, we then enter Edwin's own personal office where we see where David must have played. Also next to a picture of him in the Mimic that we saw earlier, some blueprints for Chica, Sleepy Moon, and Jugman Monty, as well as an audio log that we'll talk more about later. Either way, we can then check this computer and see his finances, which are yikes. And then we can access his surveillance room to then gather the Mimic schematics, which interestingly enough seems to be an acronym here. After getting the schematics, Chica begins hunting us. So we shut the door and head through the vents to an elevator which brings us down to the basement levels. Again, we're gonna pass over the audio logs here, but don't worry, I'll talk about them more in depth when we have all the information in hand. So for now, we continue down into the lowest floor of MCM where we meet none other than the White Tiger. White Tiger with green and blue eyes, similar to Tiger Rock from the books, as well as being turned into a plush that becomes David's favorite. This also isn't the only time the White Tiger appears. It can appear randomly in multiple sections throughout MCM, which, as many of we've called out, the white tiger acts very ghostly and supernatural. In fact, at some parts you can see his head split right off to reveal some flesh-looking material inside. This is not the Mimic. Some theorize the Mimic is just enforcing his supernatural abilities due to agony, but it all feels way too ghostly for the Mimic, since we don't see him doing anything similar throughout the entire game. To me, it seems like David may be possessing the building itself in some way, representing himself as the white tiger. This would make sense with this whole area being surrounded with children laughter, but also how David's story would then parallel the crying child story. Having a plush best friend that's seemingly physical version ends up acting in a ghostly sporadic nature after assumed possession. Either that or this is the manifestation of the agony of MCM as a whole in some way, similar to the shadow animatronics later in the story, although I personally think that this game is more so telling us that David is here as the white tiger instead, and that seems a lot stronger. But continuing on, and after finishing the most tense and one of the best sections of the entire game, we then head back to the security office for 4 AM, our ending splitting point. Now we get into the juicy stuff. The first and easiest ending is by simply listening to Dispatch's instructions, handing in your data diver with the Mimic blueprints, and simply heading back to your van. That, not suspiciously at all, is now moved to the garage, to then leave the job. Arnold drives home as fast as he can, only to be told by Dispatch that they've been trying to get a hold of him all night, and that they have to let him go. He states that he misplaced their company property, and they hold him personally responsible. Then something moves in his van, so he looks in the rearview mirror only to see the Mimic himself, who of course brutally murders him. It's clear that at some point during the game, likely after the power was restarted and Dispatch connected to the speaker systems, the Mimic ended up mimicking his voice and taking over. This in itself is huge, but it's also a hidden reference to Glitch Trap as well, and further pushing that connection, having once again the Mimic mimicking the voice of your instructor to trick you into doing something for it. In this game it's the Mimic Dispatch getting the data diver from you, and in Help Wanted it's the Mimicked tape girl getting you to put the tapes together. Speaking of Glitch Trap, we then get to the credits, which takes place in a prototype Freddy Fazbear's Pizza with prototype versions of the Core 4, which we learn about more in the game's real ending. So we'll speak more about it then, but for now take a look at the imagery here and compare it to the Pizza Party ending in Help Wanted. In this bad ending, we end up being put inside a prototype Freddy, playing on the show stage, looking at the Mimic. This directly references the Pizza Party ending, where you end up being put inside Freddy, playing on the show stage, looking at Spring Bonnie, a mascot costume the code ends up picking. This isn't even the first time they've used imagery to mimic other endings that the Mimic was theorized to be a part of. First doing it with Burn Trap in the Blob to the Mimic in the Scooper, and then again with Burn Trap reaching out of a charging pod to Glitch Trap reaching out of a charging pod. Basically saying that Glitch Trap equals Burn Trap equals Mimic. So after all the evidence in this game alone, as well as the numerous mountains of evidence in the other games too, it seems that the Mimic is indeed Glitch Trap and has been the overarching villain of the entire new story. For the secret ending and to unlock New Game Plus, you need to do the second ending first, where instead of giving up the data diver, you simply go to the computer to activate parachute.exe and drop down into the tunnels. Dispatch tells you that you're not going to make it out alive, just like the other technicians. And eventually you're led to the welcome show area where you can now play the goodbye show. This activates a button to raise from the floor, which upon going down and hitting will start to take you underground. Eventually this elevator ride will break and you must flick a lever, which causes the Mimic as Big Top to come follow you down, which causes a quick minigame where you must reset the levers as they break to reach the true bottom of MCM, research and development, which in some countries is known simply as experiment and design, as the point of it is to develop and refine new products, basically make prototypes and test them, which makes a lot of sense with what we're about to see. As we continue down, we then see this giant Freddy Fazbear head, which was probably planned to be near the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza sign, like Ronald McDonald or something, although it also appears to be the same brown Freddy Fazbear head from underneath the Pizzaplex. This does make sense with how that path leads to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, which would obviously have Freddy branding on it. Either way, we then start a generator from inside Freddy's head to open a curtain that leads to the show stage that we saw in the bad ending, leading us inside a prototype Freddy Fazbear's Pizza with prototype versions of all the original animatronics, as well as other prototype Ender 01s and prototype versions of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie 2. Note the giant prototype on the back of Fredbear's head. Now, this has raised a lot of questions, but it's very important to note that this isn't a real Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, but purely just a prototype version / demo showcase of what a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza would look like, so that William and Henry could see it, approve / reject certain aspects, come to a final plan, and then turn it into a real and finalized establishment, obviously above ground. As we know though, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza didn't open up until 1983, despite being branded as coming soon in 1979. So what happened? Well, as we also know, Edwin ran away, and MCM collapsed, meaning the new designs and the place itself remained largely unfinished, as we can see here. Although we do learn through a bunch of emails and audio logs throughout the game that this was always the plan. Basically, during all of the events regarding the Mimic, Fazbear Entertainment had actually been slowly invading Edwin's company. They had contracted him to work on multiple projects for their establishments, but realistically this was actually just to purposely drain his time, money, and stress him out, as they also start taking all of his employees from under him, as well as having a person leaking his projects and plans to Fazbear. This includes a guy named Stan, who states they can start their own machine shop, possibly in reference to Stan's budget tech from FNAF 6. But either way, with all of these employees now stolen, when Edwin is inevitably running out of trust, employees, money, and time, he simply just runs and leaves it all behind, causing the company to collapse, and Fazbear Entertainment to swoop in and grab whatever they want/need. Fazbear Entertainment's takeover and acquisition of all the characters in MCM is also directly stated in an email log from William himself, which cuts out the beginning part but says something software development and the entire MCM catalog. We would love to have you on as a lead engineer. Although we now technically own the land, we would never touch the house your parents built. We feel this offer has been more than fair, considering how far behind you are. It's just too much for you to handle alone. We are waiting for your response, William Afton. Basically, by the time the year hits 1983 and the original games start like normal, everything is now owned by, designed, created, and published entirely by Fazbear Entertainment single-handedly, even though 90% of their employees have MCM on their resume. I do find it interesting though that Edwin Murray Sr. seemed to know about this too, due to a log where Edwin says they're behind it, don't trust them, never tell them, they want to destroy you. Dad was right. We also learn that Henry knows Edwin and is even on nickname terms with him, but as a co-owner of Fazbear's, he seemingly just lets it all happen anyways, making his character more morally grey. We even know Henry stops treating him as a friend due to another audio log where he states, Fiona was right, they don't think of me as a friend anymore. This is the last project I ever do for them. As we also see, Edwin's Freddys had Monty and Bub be a part of the band, but since they were Springlock suits and Henry stated that he didn't want any at this location, they seemingly just took them off the band and out of the location for the final establishment. The map down in the prototype Freddys is actually the FNAF 3 layout, implying that the Fazbear's Fright team discovered this old design for the building and recreated it in order to make it more authentic, and it wasn't just a random layout. We also hear an audio log down here telling us that just like what happened with Chica's Party World, Henry ordered a change in the designs away from Fiona's, which look more cutesy and cartoony, into a design that Edwin claims looks creepy, aka our original animatronics we all know and love, removed from Edwin and Fiona's mascot designs. Speaking of the designs, the game, as well as Into the Pit, seemingly confirms that the first original Freddy's animatronics, used from 1983 to 1985, looked the exact same as the classics in FNAF 1, and there weren't what some call the Unwithereds, due to the prototype designs, the Endo 01s, and of course the giant Freddy Fazbear head. Gameplay wise, we then head to a computer to start up the stage lights and start a boss fight against the Mimic, now in an amalgamation of suits. We then use the 4 Springlock suits throughout the building to drain the power to the office, so that we can finally enter. It's literally just a reverse FNAF 1, where instead of fighting against animatronics and trying to reserve our power to block them off, we now are the animatronics trying to drain the power to get inside. Either way, once we drown the power, we're then allowed into the office, only to see the Maxis machine that's called F10N4, aka Fiona. Now we're at quite a confusing point, so we're going to just go through what happens in all the endings before we then break down what just happened in all the endings, and how all the lore fits together. So continuing on, and Fiona tells us to now head to Edwin's house and try to convince him to fix M2, and so we travel there. After searching for and finding 5 tapes showing the Murray's family backstory, as well as the Mimics, we then head further upstairs and we see the prototype renovated MCM, as well as a part of the house that looks blown up. We then access Edwin's computer and see alt Fazbear designs and puppet designs, which some have said is about the actual puppet that goes on to be possessed by Charlie, aka the security puppet, but I do think that keeping this game in mind, these are actually about Fiona's designs for the Fazbear project like we know she made, and the numerous puppets in this game that we later learn she also helped create, as the puppeteer she is. Either way, we then go into another surveillance room in order to activate the Cradle.exe program, which is actually the Maxis program, which the acronym stands for Mechanical X-Form Experimental Storage. Once doing so, the Mimic himself, without a costume, is now here, and hunts you down for a quick chase leading you to a generator that upon completing causes a fire to start in the building. We keep running until the Mimic once again gets stopped by an elevator exactly like the Ruined DLC, and now everything begins collapsing as the fire engulfs the building. The elevator then stops and we go through another chase through the underground. And quick side note here, look how strong the Mimic is. If it weren't for the floor beneath him literally just collapsing, he would have pushed that bridge off of him. him. Either way, eventually we get back into the car and get driven back to MCM, although the fire has beaten us there and the entire place is now burning to the ground. We quickly leave the building and rush into our van, driving away. Although just like the bad ending, the Mimic is on top of the vehicle and attacks the wheel to cause the van to crash and flip. The Mimic then comes to us and takes the data diver away, only to then leave us for dead. Then we have the secret ending unlocked after playing through the entire game again, but getting all the collectibles to then play through the moon.exe minigame, where Sun gives us the glitch permission to upgrade our data diver a secret extra time, to then go into a new hidden room in Edwin's house that looks eerily similar to the FNAF 4 bedroom, where we then tell a bedtime story about a bunch of animals who start a band together to the Mimic himself, who we then fix with the glitch permission to cause it to shapeshift into a David version of itself and eventually put him to bed? The end? What? A lot just happened in these two endings and there's so much lore to explain. So now that we have all the information on hand, let's break it all down. Through the moon.exe minigame, we learned that Edwin's favourite restaurant was actually Fredbear's singing show, implying that's where he met William and Henry and likely offered to help them with their work and improve their suits. This makes sense with how Glitchtrap doesn't look as big and hefty as the other mascot costumes that Edwin makes. The suit Glitchtrap uses is the first ever version of Spring Bonnie that likely operated at Fredbear's singing show with Freddy, the place created by William and Henry alone, which is where Edwin meets them, offers help, begins working for them and making suits, and eventually helps create the Springlock suits we know all too well. For the next location, Fredbear's family diner. As we learned earlier, Edwin and Fiona met on the job but eventually got together and marry, having a baby named David. For David's first birthday, they get him the infamous white tiger plush that ends up becoming his favourite in more ways than one. By his second birthday, Edwin has come up with a brilliant invention that he tells Fiona is the next big thing, bigger than the Cleanovac, and starts to become absorbed in his work instead of attending his own kid's party. This project is clearly meant to be the Mimic, a robotic endoskeleton that can fit into any costume and take on the persona of the character it chooses. Then, as we learned earlier, before David's third birthday, Fiona leaves to go and help out the Fall Fest crew, but never comes back. Before David's fourth birthday, Edwin actually ends up hearing Fiona's voice over the radio, likely due to the Mimic, and in his pure grief begins training the Mimic to, well, mimic Fiona, meaning Edwin ends up making the Mimic take care of David while he works. This is what the M1 code becomes, Fiona. On his fifth birthday though, Edwin leaves David at his playground, only for him to end up being dead. Due to the audio log where Edwin talks about how someone is claiming it's unsafe for David's playground to be right next to the loading dock, but Edwin stating there's no regulation saying he can't have it and refusing to move it, it's assumed that David was killed at the loading dock. We then learn that in his grief, the Mimic tells him to create another, and repeat what happened when Fiona died, which leads Edwin to take the M1 aka Fiona programming from the Mimic and put it into a supercomputer that he then names F10N4. Then with a plain Mimic endoskeleton remaining, he creates a new copy of the Mimic program, the M2 code, which starts to mimic David. Although Edwin starts to realize it's not really him, he's just going crazy at this point. This machine does not contain the real David, and it didn't contain the real Fiona either. He wants it to stop sounding like him, and so in his rage he beats the Mimic up, transfusing his agony and rage into its systems. This then causes the M2 code to be malicious and violent, as well as being forever unfinished. M1 and M2, the same machine split into two programs, life and destruction, just like the sun and moon in the moon.exe minigame. Once Fazbear Entertainment destroy Edwin's business from the inside, he runs away and shuts himself away in his house. Although sometime later it appears that M2 malfunctions and blows up in some way, causing some rubble to presumably cover Edwin and trap him beneath it. Edwin calls M2 to get help, although M2 instead mimics Edwin's abandonment of David and leaves him under the rubble to likely die. It's unclear exactly what happens to Edwin and M2 after this, but Edwin does likely die here and M2 returns back to MCM. All we know for certain though is that Fazbear Entertainment, knowing of the Mimic endoskeleton due to a leak in the company, can now finally take the equipment freely due to Edwin breaching his contract. So they send a team to come and collect their property, who die. They do this at least 12 times as we learned at the start of the game, leading right into the gameplay itself. It appears that the canon ending of the game would then be any of the two endings that Arnold drives away, as the ending we fix the Mimic's programming by replacing the pure rage and agony with love, as well as literally putting him to sleep, would mean that the violent and malicious code wouldn't be around by the time of ruin, nor help wanted, since we already put him to rest. In my opinion, it'd make a lot of sense for the burning ending to be the canon one, as that's the one we activate the Mexis program, which progresses the machine story forward, and explains turning F10N4 into its Mexis codename, as well as how we burn down MCM, which means that alongside Edwin being missing, means that Fazbear Entertainment could just take ownership of all the characters and their stories, like they they said that they'll likely do. From here we can then actually infer that William not only stole his employees, but actually moved into his house, which if the burning ending is canon would mean the remains of his house and fixing it up. And judging by the similar designs and the fact that it's a house on a hill that also contains a room resembling the FNAF 4 gameplay, that also just happens to have underground tunnels connected to it. To make it clear, this room isn't actually the FNAF 4 bedroom, and is more likely the crying child's real room itself, which works well with the nightmare gameplay being a mix of Mike's memories, the two doors being similar to the FNAF 1 office, and the nightmares being based on Freddy's characters coming from Mike's experience at Freddy's, while the room itself, as well as the hospital equipment, comes from the grief and memories of the crying child, this being what the real room looked like. Also, I would find it funny if we were right about the crying child's name being Dave, because then William would have practically stolen Edwin's dead kid's name as well. We don't have to stop here though, as we can then travel further down the timeline, to the fire of FNAF 6 and death of Fazbear Entertainment. Once Fazbear Entertainment starts up again and starts creating the in-universe games to make fun of the rumours about the murders, we know that they use vintage circuit boards to speed up the development process, which contains a malicious glitch in the code that creates the anomaly. So it seems that Fazbear Entertainment eventually used the M2 programming to try and speed up the coding for Help Wanted, only for his agony to still be there and cause the malicious anomaly to be created. The Mimic then gathered all the information from the game, mainly Pizza Party, to then choose the form of Spring Bunny and steal his persona, causing the entire Help Wanted story to then take place. Then before the time of security breach, the Mimic endoskeleton itself is brought to the Pizzaplex, or like the books, it's brought underground to the Pizza Place construction zone, and is eventually trapped down there. Its program, however, is able to spread across the Pizzaplex due to Glitch Trap, causing his agony to infect all the animatronics to get aggressive, becoming their security breach versions. Then security breach itself takes place and the Princess Quest ending occurs, where we free Vanessa from its control, again through coding similar to Moon.exe in this game, where we get the glitch permission. Then Help Wanted 2 takes place where Glitch Trap is defeated for good with the Princess Quest 4 ending, although leaving the Vanny mask still infected by the Mimic. As Mystic Hippo says, the hidden performer has taken his bow. Then sometime after, as we see in the content update for Help Wanted 2, someone, likely Vanessa with Gregory like we theorized, learns about M1 and ends up taking the Fiona machine from underneath MCM all the way to the Pizzaplex to put it underground under its program's title, Mexus. Then Ruin takes place where M2 is using Helpy, the bear character, due to still seeing itself as the child of Edwin and Fiona, who represented themselves as the Mr. and Mrs. Helpful bear characters. Not only that, but Fiona dying in the fire is also represented by the Mexus entity, which we know Fiona is a part of, being consumed by orange blocks rising up. The physical Mimic, however, can now escape the underground, and I theorize that the secret ending of this game is showing us that we're, likely Cassie's, going to fix the M2 programming in a future game and calm its rage and agony by replacing it with love. As the ending states, friendship is the real treasure, as cheesy as that may be. And that's it. This game explains a lot of the new lore and fills in a lot of the blanks in the old lore at the same time, which is amazing. I'm so excited to continue working on this timeline video I'm making right now, because this clears a lot up and makes for such a great and surprisingly straightforward story. Secret of the Mimic may just be my favorite FNAF game. Is it yours? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you all to my amazing channel members. Become one today, subscribe if you haven't already, and I hope you all have a good day/night. Bye.